My name is Aleksander Wozniak. I'm a Polish artist, draughtsman, painter and printmaker. I also deal with book art. We are located in my art studio in Szczytno. On a daily basis, I work as an associate professor at the University of Warmia and Mazury in Olsztyn. I teach art students multiple printmaking techniques, especially lithography. In 2009, I discovered Mokuhanga woodcut, which since then has become an important tool of expression in my creative work. In the first part of this work, I would like to present a graphic series titled Variation on a Skull, which I made at the beginning of 2021. These are various representations of the aforementioned theme, which were printed from 3 separately carved woodcut blocks. The creative method that I used in the process of creating this series of prints was a graphic improvisation consisting in the free production and alteration of image in the printing process. During this process, I tried to obtain as many different prints as possible using only 3 woodcut matrices. As you can see, the improvisational state used in the above graphic series doesn't consist in producing identical images from the block as it's done in traditional graphic edition. It is rather an attempt to explore the matrix potential and create various graphic instances. It became the most important principle of image production in my improvised graphic process. This activity was carried out intuitively and without a detailed plan. It also took place in real time in order to maintain the continuum of producing images one by one. Such practice in the variation on a skull became also an expression of my subconscious desire to create some sort of visual narrative using the changes that image is subjected to in the printing process. The presented techniques that I use in the variation on a skull are generally considered to be typographical errors. Yes, and it's from controlled errors that I wanted to build my images. Pictures that deviated more and more from graphics became its deconstruction and contradiction. Such an interpretation of water-based woodcut, however, was born from my fascination with woodcut and its organic aspect. In my interpretation, the Mokuhanga woodcut oscillates more and more towards painting, in which the role of a brush is played by a woodcut matrix and the graphic printing is a free location of another colored spot on the paper. Why can't you do that? Various techniques that I use when making woodcut pictures rarely exist on their own. They form a complex process. In this video, I would like to demonstrate what it looks like. At the same time, however, I would like to discuss the most important separate techniques that I use in my, to some extent, accidental printmaking process. Printing from the concave parts of the woodcut block. I often print my images from the concave parts of the woodcut block. I press the paper into the recesses of the block with my hand or other tools. The block gives off paint and the picture changes. White parts are no longer white, sometimes it's the other way around. This results in the awareness of ambiguity of the matrix itself, which may contain more than just one image. The concave parts can be engraved shallow or deep. Also, it may contain the appropriate texture, which if necessary will be transferred to the paper. Apart from the brilliant tool, which is barren, parts of the body become an interesting tool for creating graphic image. The hand, especially its fingers, allows you to gain even greater local control of the image produced. Overload with paint. Flooding with the ink is a technique that I used for the first time many years ago due to dissatisfaction with the produced woodcut block. It became a tool to change the carved image by pouring in onto the block and printing it on the paper. In the series of Variation on a Skull, I also use this technique to create a woodcut image. I pour the ink on the block generously or locally, depending on the intended but not fully controlled graphic effect. Rag. Sometimes I use rags to wipe the paint from the woodcut matrix locally. It gives various possibilities of creating tonal transitions or graphic deficiencies. Ultra black paint. Japanese inks are beautiful and traditional medium in the process of Mokuhanga printmaking. The inks have variety of properties as well as color. However, I think it's interesting to introduce ultra black paint to the color palette. It's an acrylic paint with a very high degree of blackness. The manufacturer claims that it absorbs up to 98% of the light. The use of this paint gives an interesting effect of deepening the tonal range and creates a kind of extreme black point against which other types of black, gray and also color are ordered. Acrylic paint is not traditionally used in Mokuhanga woodcut, but we can use it in justified cases. After all, it's also a water-based paint. Freeform bokashi. Bokashi is a very interesting technique of obtaining color transitions typical for Mokuhanga. A traditional bokashi process in ukiyo-e was optimized for high-volume printing. It assumed repeatability, therefore very simple repetitive movements were used during the production of graphic edition. Of course, you can also use this technique in your own way and thus obtain various effects on the graphic print. Water spill printing. I sometimes spray water on the matrix with the color applied. The resulting print is accidental, however, you can learn to control the obtained effect to some extent and include this technique in the process of creating a graphic print. Combination of images. In the variation on a skull, an important technique is the combination or superposition of two or more images on top of each other. The blocks cease to be just fixed images. They themselves become modular and their position is optional. I rarely position the print according to the registration marks, but it is rather processed by eye. Thanks to different combination of images, we obtain an accidental but also more complex image. Image multiplication. In accordance with its nature, a woodcut image can be reproduced. You can also reproduce the image many times on the same sheet of paper. In this process, I often use intuitive positioning, but sometimes I design special registration marks by which I move the image when creating a graphic print. Spot printing. Of course, it is not necessary to print the entire image. By manually applying paint to a woodcut block, we can isolate individual fragments and print them in any place on the paper. This technique also has a strong influence on the concept of producing a woodcut matrix, which is treated fragmentarily as a set of modular elements designed for possible modification in the printing process. Four x 4 is a series of woodcut paintings that I created in 2021 depicting human faces. Most of them are simple portraits of my daughters. In these cycles, I also use the improvisational mode to create sequences of images. In this series, however, I decided to limit the number of images produced in a series to 4. The 4-panel formula in the 4 x 4 cycle becomes the simple formal structure on the basis of which I was building the aforementioned graphic cycle. The 4-panel module loosely refers to the concept of Kishin Getsu, a Japanese popular narrative formula. Kishinketsu is very simple but also an extremely inspiring narrative structure. The most important aspect of the Kishinketsu for me is the premise that something has to happen. So my motivation was to design and provoke this mysterious event in the graphic process. Graphic series from 4x4 cycle ceased to be a traditional graphic edition. Their value as an author's edition also becomes less important. Produced series of print became a space inside which a visual narrative is placed. The author's graphic edition, therefore, becomes a graphic cycle. Mokuhanga woodcut is an extremely interesting printmaking technique, both in terms of traditional methods of creating a printed image, but also as a great tool for experimenting. This presentation is an attempt to draw attention to the unique and relatively rarely used possibilities of the water-based woodcut technique in an improvised printmaking process. Unique feature of the Mokuhanga printmaking allow for many interesting activities of free interference in the process of creating a graphic image, which is an essential part of the improvised method that I wanted to introduce in this presentation. I believe that learning the meanders of this graphic technique can change one's point of view on graphic art in general. It has also irreversibly influenced the shaping of my creative process.